We begin tonight with the breaking news reporting in the Washington Post tonight. The Washington Post is reporting, quote, the Turkish government has told U.S. officials that it has audio and video recordings that prove Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul this month. According to U.S. and Turkish officials, the recordings show that a Saudi security team detained Khashoggi in the consulate after he walked in on October 2nd to obtain an official document before his upcoming wedding, then killed him and dismembered his body, the officials said. The audio recording that officials described reportedly contains gruesome evidence of what happened to Khashoggi inside the consulate. Quote, you can hear his voice and the voices of men speaking Arabic, a person said. You can hear how he was interrogated, tortured, and then murdered. Turkish officials are reportedly concerned that releasing such a recording could reveal Turkish intelligence gathering techniques on embassies and consulates in their country. The president began his day with a phone call to Fox and Friends, and even the president's best friends at Fox and Friends were surprised to hear him say this morning that U.S. relations with Saudi Arabia are now, his word, excellent.
What's at stake with U.S.-Saudi relations, sir?
I would say they're excellent.
You can't be killing Washington Post journalists. So is everything in jeopardy now, sir? Is that in jeopardy now, our good relations with Saudi Arabia?
I have to find out what happened. I mean, I do have to find out, and we're probably getting closer than you might think, but I have to find out what happened.
Fox and Friends obviously has a better grasp than the president of what the Jamal Khashoggi story should mean for U.S. relations with Saudi Arabia. Later that morning, the president proved, as in all things, that for him, it is all about the money. No matter how many reporters Saudi Arabia might decide to murder, we still have to be nice to them if they buy U.S. weapons systems.
I would not be in favor of stopping a country from spending $110 billion, which is an all-time record, and letting Russia have that money and letting China have that money. But what good does that do us? Again, this took place in Turkey. And to the best of our knowledge, Khashoggi is not a United States citizen. Is that right? Or is that right? He's a permanent resident. OK. We don't like it, John. We don't like it. And we don't like it even a little bit. But as to whether or not we should stop $110 billion from being spent in this country, knowing they have 4 or 5 alternatives, 2 very good alternatives, that would not be acceptable to me.
Everything the president said there is a lie. There is no deal to sell $110 billion in weapon systems to Saudi Arabia. And in fact, it would be very difficult for Saudi Arabia to obtain new weapon systems from other countries that would be compatible with the weapon systems that Saudi Arabia has already heavily invested in from the United States. Bruce Riedel of the Brookings Institution told the Washington Post today it would take decades to transition from U.S. and U.K. aircraft, for example, to Russian or Chinese aircraft. Same is true for tanks, communications equipment, and other high-tech equipment. Then the Saudis don't have time, given they are bogged down in Yemen. When it comes to weapon systems, the United States has always been dealing with Saudi Arabia from a position of strength, something Donald Trump apparently does not know. It is Saudi Arabia that desperately needs American weapon systems, not the United States, that needs desperately to sell them to Saudi Arabia. Donald Trump personally has always loved doing business with Saudi Arabia, no matter what they do around the world.
Saudi Arabia, and I get along great with all of them. They buy apartments from me. They spend $40 million, $50 million. Am I supposed to dislike them? I like them very much.
Joining our discussion now, Shane Harris, intelligence and national security reporter who helped break tonight's story in the Washington Post. Shane, thank you very much for joining us tonight on this breaking news night. There are 4 of you bylined on this. I can see that it was teamwork. But what is your assessment of what the evidence base is here, knowing what you know? You have reports from officials who are aware of these audio tapes. What do we know about who has actually heard them?
Well, I think our understanding at this point, our best understanding, is that the Turks have heard them and have access to this material and believe that it's very compelling and demonstrates proof in their mind that Jamal Khashoggi was killed and tortured inside the consulate. They have shared the information, as we understand it, about what these recordings show and what you can hear on them. It's not clear with American officials. It's not clear to us that they have physically handed over the material to the U.S. side so that it can be assessed and analyzed. But I have to say, from talking to U.S. officials about this in the past 24 to 48 hours, I'm not hearing anyone say that they don't believe what the Turks are saying or that they don't find it persuasive. No one has necessarily come out and saying we've defined proof positive that it's legitimate, but I'm not hearing the kind of pushback and skepticism you might normally hear from intelligence officials if they thought the information was flawed or that it was incorrect.
You're also reporting tonight that one other element of evidence is that a friend of Khashoggi's texted him after he entered the consulate, and that text was never received. There's evidence that it wasn't received, and clearly that indicates that Khashoggi has not been in a position since shortly after entering the consulate to respond or receive a text.
Right, and this also, this comes with other pieces of information, sort of the absence of information in some cases. There's surveillance footage that has been leaked out showing him walking into the consulate. There's nothing showing him leaving. So you're sort of what we're seeing now, and this is typical in a case like this where you have this sort of mystery, is these different pieces of information and intelligence, the mosaic, are all starting to line up. Clearly the Turks believed from the beginning that since there was footage of him going in and not coming out, that was pretty damning. But now I think what we're seeing is that they really believe that this other, very documented type of information, quite graphic and gruesome, as you and Rachel said at the top, demonstrates to their mind, I think, conclusively what happened here.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.